everyone, and welcome to Scots Wi Hay's Best Books podcast for 2021. And I'm joined once again by Publishing Scotland's Vikki Reilly. Hello, Vikki.
Hello.
Armed with glass, me too. Lovely to see you.
Yes, prepared to speak about the wonders of Scottish books.
Well, it's been quite a year. Let's start with a kind of overall how the year was for you, because I do think it was a bit of a special one.
I know what you mean, and because it's been such a huge year, when I was sort of thinking back to the whole year and even thinking back to the start of the year, it feels like the year's been much longer. And I don't know if that's to do with like lockdown and stuff like that, but just like, oh yeah, that was that year. That was this year too. So yeah, there's been tons of new releases that have made a big impact.
No, absolutely. And, you know, we're going to split them down into kind of things that we talk about, but we can say that there was, you know, the re-emergence or the reappearance of some of the Scottish literary heavyweights, as you said, to who published books, but there was also some amazing first or even second novels and books that were published this year, and new voices, all of those things. I think it's been really rather special. So
I hope that, so I know, you just think it was such a big year that you're just like, we can't top it next again year. But then I've started to get in 2022 books and you're just like, oh no, that's just going to be as full on as well.
That's right. And we will, at the end of this, we will chat about what's coming in 2022, because it is really quite exciting. But let's start with kind of trends for this year. Was there anything you noted that was happening in Scottish books?
Well, I do. Yes. I don't know if you've put this down, but like one of the things that I've noticed is historical fiction was quite prominent, but not in an obvious way, right, in Scottish fiction, and like that so many books were historical fiction, but the way people probably think about historical fiction doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the historical fiction books were like. But which
ones do you have in mind? Give us a couple of examples.
I'll elaborate.
Yes.
So, you know, when you normally think of historical fiction, you think of sort of quite grand narratives with like a sort of grand, quite historical voice as well. Whereas I think historical fiction this year was really dominant, but the voices and the styles and the tones and the periods were just so rich and varied that you probably wouldn't think that so many of the books this year were historical fiction. So, you know, I've read like sort of more like your classic kind of historical fiction books, like maybe like Sarah Sheridan's The Fair Botanist, or I'm reading Rose Nicholson by Andrew Gregg.
I've got that as well. Looking forward to that.
But then you've got stuff like, you know, like probably you wouldn't think to yourself, Luckenbooth's a historical novel, but it really is. Kitchenley 434's a historical novel. Rizzio by Denise Mina's historical novel. Case Study by Graham Burnett is a historical novel. It looked like everybody was talking about the past in lots of different genres and doing it in such a variety of ways that we've probably not thought, oh my God, look at all these historical fiction books coming out this year.
Oh, that's a good point. Actually, I hadn't thought about it that way. But yeah, absolutely. And James Robertson's News of the Dead is another one that's very interesting. I guess, I mean, there's parts of it set in the present day, but also you've got it jumps back twice to the past, and is a very, as always with James Robertson, a very interesting way of kind of looking at Scotland and Scotland's past in particular.
And the language as well in all of these is really varied too. So like there's different sort of like there's sort of high literary historical style where you might incorporate some of the old language, but then, you know, people like Jenny Fagan or Denise Mina used their books and the language and the way the tone of the narrative voice was really different to how you would normally think of how historical fiction is written.
Yeah.
So it's just been really, really interesting to, I mean, even David Keenan's Monument Maker
Yeah.
is a little bit like a historical fiction novels with the period in oh god, what the period cartoon, that's it.
Yes.
Like the
Well,
cartoon
other places
section.
that they go as well. I mean, there are other,
Yeah.
maybe not as
Oh
far
yeah, in the
back.
Second World War
Yeah.
section as well. So yeah, but you would that the historicalness of them is the one thing that ties them all together. But the voices are so different, and the way they've tackled history and thought about history is so different. So yeah, that's what I've noticed this year, is that history and the way that we present it has been quite dominant, but at the same time really rich and varied.
I'm sure we'll talk about Luckenbooth a bit more as we go on, but that's interesting to think about, because there's not just one voice there. There's all sorts of different voices going different periods of the 20th century. So the language is hugely important to kind of make those distinctive voices, which Jenny Fagan manages to do. Language is something I wanted to talk about, because I thought one of the trends is a terrible term. One of the things this year was we had books being written in a kind of urban Scots, perhaps more than before.
Right, okay.
We've got Eli Percy's Duck Feet, which, you know, a tremendous book, which has got an incredible kind of, it's set in Renfrew and Paisley, and it really captures the kind of language of the school, not just the time, but the place as well. And then also Emma Gray's Be Good to Your Mammy, you know, which again is written in wonderful, rich Scots book, and also Colin Burnett's kind of leaf. It's a working class state of mind, where he really does, well, I mean, it's your part of the world, but I think he really manages to capture the kind of word on the street and the way people talk to each other, often in the places that he writes about. And that was something that was really interesting to come through, because you mentioned the kind of older Scots that's in perhaps the James Robertson or in other historical novels, but this kind of urban Scots is still rare enough to make note of, I think.
Oh yeah, and funnily enough, like, I don't think that this is a trend overall, but a trend for me in my reading is that I felt like I read a lot more books about Edinburgh this year.
Yeah.
And so that's just been my own personal trend. Well, you know, you always like to read about the place that you're from, so to see how other people see it.
It's often underrated, I think, you know, right? Reading about your own city or your own town or wherever it might be. And you had some great books in Edinburgh. Bitter Hall by Helen Mcclory being another one as well.
Yes. And well, one of my favourites was by T.L. Hoochu, The Library of the Dead, which is the first in a series, which was a mixture. It's futuristic sci-fi, but it has a heavy historical element to it as well, because it totally harks back to maybe like the sort of the medical historical crime fiction of Ambrose Parry or Kate Wells, just because there's a sort of gothic, there's a definite gothic undertone to it all as well. So yeah, it's just, and also the Edinburgh that he writes in it is not the places like Colin Burnett, like he writes about Leith, which maybe is a little bit more iconic now.
Yeah.
But the places that T.L. Hoocher writes about is like the west side of Edinburgh, which is definitely not had a lot of books written about it, because it's such an unromantic, sort of unremarked upon part of Edinburgh, just because, you know, it doesn't fall into the sort of easy characterizations of Edinburgh. It's just like, there's a sort of suburban feel to West Edinburgh, and he sort of captures that really, really well, and but at the same time makes it a whole sort of monstrous dystopian place as well.
That's interesting. I think suburban Scotland is still something that hasn't been written about enough. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the year's debuts, because there were some really interesting ones which came out, and that includes, well, this is my proof copy, so it's not got the lovely picture on it, but it's Charlie Roy's The Broken Pane, which is a fantastic novel, again, about, there was a lot of writing about family this year as well, a lot of books including some of the ones we talked about, Duck Feet and Emma Gray's book, but a lot about a family and the secrets and lies of family. And few did it as well as Charlie Roy did.
I wish I had backup, because I've got a copy in the office, and the hardback is a really lovely thing. It's got, like, you know, the nice ribbon bookmark in it, and it's a really chunky quality piece of book.
Well, I've got a couple more debuts to mention, but do you have any that that stood out for you?
Weirdly, like, I feel like we're still living in a Shuggie Bain world.
yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if we talked about that much last year. Maybe we did, but yes,
yeah, we did.
Yeah.
But I mean, the paperback was released this year, and you know, he's still. I think because this was the year that he was allowed to travel to Scotland. Then you know he's been around, so it still kind of feels like we're still in the midst of Shuggie Bain, and you know, like Eli Percy's book as well, that kind of feels like a similar world, done differently, but a similar world, and Colin Burnett's as well, a debut. I was remembering the short list, and although Eli's is the only debut, every single one of those books that was in the short list.
Sorry, I hate to say this, it has had a novel out before.
Of course, yeah, I completely forgot.
Plus Jules.
I know that. I don't know. Well,
I thought you knew that. I didn't want you to dig yourself any further.
I've got lockdown brain completely.
Which is a very good novel as well, I have to say. But yes, you're right. We'll talk about the Saltire Awards a bit more later. But while we're talking about Shuggie Bain, I mean, it kind of shows you what winning or even being nominated for one of the really big prizes can do, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's strange because, you know, his new one's just about to come out next year, like quite early on in the year, and it's kind of when the Beatles released With the Beatles when Please Please Me was still at #1.
First mention of the Beatles. How long are we in? Well, it's not bad, Vikki. It's not bad.
Sorry, I couldn't help it.
Fair enough. Another one I wanted to talk about, and not just because my quote's on the cover.
Oh yes.
George Patterson's The Girl, the Crow, the Writer, and the Fighter, which we were both at the launch. What a great launch it was!
I know. I wish all launches were as great as that, because it was just. It's good to have all kinds of different entertainment, and I've not danced like that for a long time.
And DJs, and it was it was fantastic. But it's a great book. I think it's a really interesting first novel. It's partly because it's not set in Scotland or get anything to do with Scotland. It's a real great American novel that he's written, which was a surprise to me. I mean, I don't know what I was expecting. I probably wasn't expecting anything. It's his debut, but it's a really, if you love your American fiction, then this is a great book. And if you just love your fiction, it's a great book. And I can't wait to see what George does next. I'm not sure he's the publisher, but yeah.
Because normally, you know, there's a bit of a thing where, you know, when you write your first novel, you're kind of writing about yourself a lot.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, he went as far away from himself as possible, you know, not only from where he lives, where he grew up, but like his book is international. It's about people and a time that, you know, he wasn't there, and you know, it's about Henry Miller and Sonny Liston. It's another
historical novel, isn't it? Really.
That's true. Yeah. Now that you say that, it totally is. See, I didn't just make these things up.
Oh, exactly. Another debut, but from someone who is well kent in Scottish literary circles. I think it is the debut. Now, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but Harry Josephine Giles' Deep Wheel Arcadia debut novel.
First novel.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also poetry as well, as you might expect, and it's written in the Orkney dialect, and it's an astonishing book. It's sci-fi as well. So are you ticking off the boxes here? Orkney dialect, poetry, sci-fi. I mean, it's some undertaking.
The playing with language in that book is something that was so lovely to see as well, because even in the English translation, because so many times when you talk about Scots, even just like my kind of Scots, which is not Orcadian Scots, but when you try, it's about getting the essence of what the word means, particularly when you talk about like sort of Scots words, and they do that so well in Deep Real Arcadia, because the sort of the translation is not, it feels exact in its non-wordiness, if you know what I mean.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I have to say that I kind of had to restart this about 3 times, because I first of all, I thought this is a direct translation, which it really isn't. And then I thought, well, I have to read one and then the other. And then I kind of started reading the Orkney. I thought, no, I think I can get through this. And then you realize that what's in the so-called translation is actually lots of possible translations of single words, because as we know, there's plenty of words in Scots that don't translate directly, you know, into English. So, and that's kind of runs right through it. It's an incredible undertaking. Yeah.
It shows like how creatively you can think about language as well,
Very
because for it to be a literal translation is still a creative act.
Yeah.
But the translation in that one is about the essence of the word and making new words up to portray that essence.
Yeah.
It was really great to read. I was just like, why hasn't this been done before?
No, absolutely. But the perfect person to do it, definitely. And it takes us neatly onto poetry itself. How was your year in poetry? I have to admit, I didn't read a lot of poetry this year.
No, I'm the same. I mean, I mostly get my poetry on the stage rather than the page, I will say.
Very well put.
But that's not that I don't appreciate poetry on the page as well. But yeah, that's mostly where I pick up my poetry. And there's been a lot of brilliant performances that I've seen this year as well.
Yeah, very much. It was one of the nice things about being able to get out again. It was great to go and see gigs, and it was great to be back at book events, but to see spoken word performance again was just very exciting. And again, both of us went to Voodoo Days.
Oh yeah, that was a great launch too.
Stephen Watt and Jason Gollop. Jason's sections of the book are prose, but Stephen Watt's are fantastic. It's fantastic poetry once again, all about music. Highly recommend it. And it is something which I kind of agree with you. I like to go and see spoken word perhaps rather than sit down with a book of poetry, at least over the last few years anyway.
Yeah,
But to see it performed is always a joy.
Yeah, totally. In Edinburgh, they started a whole new poetry festival here, run by Jenny Nevin and Kevin Williamson, called Push the Boat Out, which was at Summerhall in November, I think. Dates and times are a bit fuzzy with me this year, I have to say. And it was such a good weekend to go to. I think other than the book festival in August, it was one of the first times that I'd been properly at sort of book events again, and it was brilliant to go. And again, the vibe of it was so lovely. It was such a, even though there was lots of different events happening all over Summerhall, there you felt like there was a sort of commonality and togetherness with all the events going on. There was, I think maybe it is because we're just so pleased to be out.
Well, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, so there was just, I don't know, in all the events that I went to, there was just such a welcoming feel. And it felt, even though there was folk on stage and we were down below, and even though like the audience had masks on, it felt really intimate, and it felt like it properly did feel like a conversation in a way that sometimes it doesn't feel like that when you're at book events. It was really lovely. So I hope that carries on. I hope Push the Boat Out is going to become a regular fixture, because it was a really, really great event.
Sounds it, absolutely. And while we're talking about Voodoo Days, I wanted to give a mention for Speculative Books, because they released some really interesting collections, one by Josephine Sillars, Desperate Characters, and another by Henry Bell, The Last Lochan, both of which are excellent small collections. I can recommend to everyone, but they seem to be doing some really, really interesting things. In fact, they also did, we'll talk about him later on.
All right, yeah, of course.
As well, which came out right at the beginning of the year.
It's just like the small presses are kicking out of the park this year.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
the novella as a form has really made a kind of comeback as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've already sort of touched upon Eli Percy, and Monstrous Press is a tiny wee publisher. Speculative Books are doing really well. Stewed Rhubarb is another publisher that does really gorgeous looking poetry pamphlets. Yeah, it's just 404's Inklings books as well. So like it's just been really nice to see smaller publishers doing different things and offering books in a different way to people.
We'll talk about publishers next, I think. But before we move on to that, I just wanted to mention Kat Hepburn's dating and other hobbies, partly because, sadly, excuse me, partly because, oh gosh, it's totally slipped my mind. What
Sonic Youth.
That's it, Sonic Youth are no more. That's what a coughing fit.
Yeah.
Sonic Youth are no more, which is a real shame, but I know both Kevin and Kat are doing stuff, and this was her latest collection, which is hilarious in places and really moving in others. And Kat was a podcast guest on Scottish Radio, which was a really interesting chat.
I know, she's a brilliant performer.
Yeah, absolutely. More for the performers. Well, you mentioned publishers there, and it was a really interesting year, I think, for publishing. How did you feel? You're at the hub of it, you're at the center of it.
Well, I mean, it's been we can't lie that it's not been a difficult couple of years.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's been great to see how everybody's reacted to that, and how everybody has pivoted and adapted in loads of different ways just to do the best that they can throughout this sort of strange period. And I don't know if you know this, but we've never had as many publishing members as we do at the moment, because all throughout the last 2 years, so many micro presses have started up and are offering different things to different audiences, and so it's really heartening to see that but people haven't been cautious in a time when we've had to be cautious in the world outside. Folk have really not been cautious about the projects that they take on and the creativity that they want to get involved in. So it's great. I can't get enough of it, really. Like, sometimes we're just like, another new member, because you kind of feel like, I don't know, you kind of feel like you must know all the sort of secret up and coming things just because you're in that sphere, so you pay attention to what's happening. But things are popping up from all over Scotland in different places, and you're just like, well, there you go. I
think that's one of the interesting things, is they are popping up from all over Scotland. Instead of being this dominated by the central belt, there are places, all over the shop. And maybe that's because you can do that now. Technology allows you to do those things.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the other great thing is that we all look out for each other as well. We've all, like, it's lovely to see how our membership gives each other advice and speaks to everybody that's sort of in the same boat as them. And it's been lovely to see.
It's really interesting. I was talking to someone recently who's in another area of the arts in Scotland. I won't say who or what, but and they were saying about the kind of conflicts and infighting and all that. I said, it seems to me that Scottish publishing Scottish writing who maybe had some of that in the past, but it does seem that everyone thinks we're in the same boat. How can we help each other? How can we support each other? And it's just the right way to do it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like anything,
course.
there'll be personality clashes and stuff like that, but I know that like that's unimportant, because in the main, like that as I say, that's like personal things rather than something signifying the sector as a whole.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really cooperative, friendly place. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
And there has been some really interesting kind of developments. I think you spoke about 404 Inc. and doing their Inklings. I've got 3 of them here. I've got loads of them, which is a great.
I know. Again, it's like what an obvious idea. It just shows you, like, you know, the simplest ideas are often the most effective ones.
Yeah,
and
I get a new one every month or so, and it's just an absolute pleasure to have it drop through the door. And they're always interesting. It's been a great thing. And you mentioned Monstrous Regiment. I mean, this is perhaps the breakthrough novel, Duck Feet, I should say, for people listening and not watching the thing. Eli Percy's Duck Feet. It's perhaps the breakout novel of the year, and one of the best. And for a small press like Monstrous Regiment to kind of do it, it's fantastic.
I know. I mean, they've done great books previous to Duck Feet as well.
Yes.
But I think this is definitely the one that's broke them into the mainstream book trade's minds.
Yeah.
You know, because it's hard. It can be really hard for small press to get taken seriously by the mainstream trade, you know, like the bookshop chains and you know, and all that kind of stuff. It can be really hard to say you can trust our publishing program and what we're going to do, and I think that's definitely happened for Monstrous Regiment with Duck Feet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been flying off the shelves all year, and the amount of times it's like, oh, we've sold out again. We're going to have to do another reprint. So yeah, it's just brilliant. It's brilliant to see. I mean, I remember when Monstrous Regiment were in telling us about it, and when they first joined Publishing Scotland, because they joined a little bit before Duck Feet came out, and I remember thinking, oh, that's going to be a really interesting book, and it's great to see when all the good work comes together to create such a success.
No, absolutely right. And the other new publishers to me, you probably know them, but one was Taproot, who is in Perth. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a couple of new publishers in Perth. A few, yeah. But Taproot aren't members yet.
Oh, well, if you listen to this, Taproot, because
I know, but I have spoken to them. I have spoken to them.
The Other Side of Stone, which is a beautiful. It's a cracking book, but it's also such a lovely book. You know, such a really beautifully done book, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But that was nice to see that small publishers were publishing really lovely books as well, which, you know, has not always been the case.
Yeah, the publishing, the production values, have really shot up. Like gorgeous hardbacks and as I say, like little bookmark things and all that kind of stuff. You know, like people are really because you have to. You know, that's just one of the things that's particularly been the case since like ebooks and all that kind of thing. It's like, well, if you're just interested in the story, why would you not just download an ebook?
Yeah.
But if you want something that's beautiful to have as well as to read, then you've got to pay attention to your production values, and the small presses are really paying attention to that.
Well, another example which we mentioned already is The Crow, the Writer, the Fighter, Into Books, which is part of Into Creative, Stephen Carlton's empire. But another beautiful object, and really, you know, something that you really want to have in the hardback edition.
No, I mean, that book could have been done on the much cheaper, on the cheap. But it, like, the thought that's been put into it is really nice. Yeah. And charcoal press as well.
No way.
What was that? Sorry?
There's no way Stephen would have done that. He if he wants to do something, he will do it to the highest quality possible. Yes, charcoal. Now they're an interesting press.
Oh, they just keep going from strength to strength, and they're getting bigger and bigger and better the whole time. And I think it's interesting that since the Saltires introduced the book cover award, that they've won it both times.
Yeah. That is very interesting and should be noted, absolutely.
Yeah, and they've got a signature style. You just know what a charcoal press book is even before you pick it up. They've got a distinctive look and they've got a distinctive feel, and because you know that the story inside is going to be quality too. It's that I love charcoal press. I think more power to them.
No, absolutely, absolutely right.
And they're branching out into English language. Well, they're branching out into English as the first language books next year as well, all connected with translation as the theme. So it's not like they're just printing any old English language thing. The theme is still translation, but things that don't have to be translated into English in 2022, which is going to be really interesting to see, because it includes fiction as well as non-fiction, which is
One of the things I noted is some of the Scottish books, notable Scottish books that have been published by publishers outside of Scotland. White Rabbit, for instance. White Rabbit.
Oh yeah. They should have an office in Scotland. They kind of feel like honorary Scots. Absolutely.
Well, they did Kitchenley 434, Monument Maker David Keenan, also the Bobby Gillespie biography, autobiography, which I might talk about later. And just the stuff they release is just fantastic. It's so up my street. They did a Michael Bracewell short book, which I loved, and sometimes you think that they're just publishing for me, which is great.
I know what you mean. That's all. The new Lenny Kaye book that's just come out. I need to get a copy of that, because I've already downloaded the playlist that they made for it, which is great. And so I'm totally. I'm going to wait I have to see, I'm at the time of the year where I can't buy anything new until after Christmas, just to be on the safe side.
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah, good point. They also did the Dylan Jones book, which, although it's not Scottish, I absolutely loved. So yeah, White Rabbit, just fantastic. Another one, and you talk about books that have got an identity, and have I got them to hand? I hope I do, maybe I don't. It's Guts Publishing, who are based in London.
Oh, right,
But who did, here we go.
Yeah, they've had a raft of Scottish authors with
Scottish
books this year as well.
In particular, and we'll talk about memoirs and the non-fiction in a second. But Aidan Martin's Euphoric Recall, Fishtown, John Gerard Fagan, and one which I haven't read, but it's on my to-read pile, is Gillian Halkett's Blade in the Shadow. But again, you can see that they've really got a theme in how they look, and they're really interesting books. I mean, Aidan's in particular is an astonishing piece of honest writing. But before
I would also include Picador in as a London publisher that should have some sort of Scottish office too, because they obviously they've got Chuggy Bain and Douglas Stewart, but they've got Jackie Kaye as well.
Yep.
Who else have they got? They've got more. I think did Picador not do Deep Wheel Arcadia as well? I think they did.
I think you're right. In fact, I'm sure. Picador Poetry.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Don Patterson.
I mean, they have got a history of publishing a lot of Scottish writers. But that was really interesting to me. That even, I mean, Guts seems to be a really interesting small publisher that's really taken a chance in publishing some of these unknown or little known writers, which I think is interesting.
No, you carry on. Well, I just realised I was going to talk about a 2022 book, but that'll come.
I feel once we're talking about Scottish publishing, we should talk about Brian Hamill and the Common Breath. Sadly, Brian passed away this year, and just when the Common Breath were doing some amazing things, releasing, the works of Tom Leonard and various, forgotten texts, and also putting together The Middle of a Sentence, this incredible anthology of prose that happened. And yeah, just really to say how missed Brian Hamill was. A great publisher, but a lovely, lovely man, and is much, much missed, I think.
I know it's a shame that was it Voices in the Dark? Is that was the
Yeah.
big project that they were working on?
Yeah.
It's really it's really, really sad that never got to come into fruition, because again, that was going to shine a light on a lot of new voices, and yeah, it's a shame.
It absolutely is, and Brian is much, much missed. Well, I want to talk about memoirs, actually, since we mentioned Guts Publishing, and you've got Aidan Martin's book, John Gerard Fagan, Gillian Halkett. Was there any kind of memoirs or non-fiction that really caught your eye this year?
Well, I've already brought it up.
Oh.
See, but it doesn't feel like a memoir.
Tell us what it is, Vikki. Tell us what it is. People are listening to this.
Right. Oh, yes. Hello, listeners. This book is Jackie Kaye's book on Bessie Smith, which it is a re-release. It was first released in the 90s or the early 2000s, I think, and it's been sort of updated and things. And even though it tells you a lot about Bessie Smith, it doesn't feel like a memoir or a biography in the usual sense, because a lot of it is done creatively. There's a lot of, it feels like sort of fictional techniques that are also in it as well. Like she puts herself in Bessie Smith's mind and sort of narrates things from her point of view in different areas as well. And it was just brilliant to read. I was so right in the mood for it at the time that it came out as well, because I've also been reading a book this year called She Bop, which is about the history of women in music.
Oh, yes. And
I've been reading it really, really slowly because I've been listening to the music at the same time as reading it. So I'm only on chapter 2, I still think, because I read the chapter and then listen to the back catalogues of every single person that's mentioned in it. So I have really only done like the blues and jazz section and the sort of 60s girl groups and soul section. And I'd just read the blues and jazz chapter and then read this. So I felt like I was getting an even more of a flavour of Bessie Smith, and listening to her is excellent. And I found all these brilliant videos of her on YouTube as well. And the event that Jackie Kaye did in the book festival was one of my favourites as well. What I will admit, I even had a wee tear at the end, just because, she brought her friend, that's terrible, I've forgotten her name, but she was singing Bessie Smith songs as well, and she was magnificent, absolutely magnificent.
So another memoir I wanted to mention was Surya Kaye's Unspoken, which came out living with mental illness. I know Surya a bit. We met at university at the same time, and it's an astonishing, again, incredibly honest book about her own problems with mental health, including a psychotic event which meant she was given ECT therapy, which is something I have to say I didn't know we still did. But she's a wonderful writer. You might know her previous books, The Mouse Deer Kingdom and The Little Hut of Leaping Fishes, which were both incredible novels. But this is it gives you a real insight into, because everyone's relationship with mental illness is different, and this gives you a real insight into hers. And again, at the heart of it is this relationship, and really difficult relationship with family that comes through, and also being taken out of place, and all that kind of stuff. It's very, very good. I do recommend it. Aside from their memoir, is there any others that you wanted to mention?
Do you know, I've not read as much non-fiction this year as I normally do. I'm thinking about in themes, really, like obviously nature writing stroke memoir has been big this year.
Isn't it? Nature writing, actually, maybe to do with people wanting to get out or whatever, but that has been a big thing over lockdown, I think. But the nature writing is so much more personal as well. It's not really just maybe sort of old school nature writing where they talk about nature in a more
objective way. It's that, well, a lot of the nature writing now is much more subjective and about the author's relationship with the places that they're talking about. So there was, like, you know, the Small Bodies of Water, which was the first winner of the Nan Shepherd prize that Canongate run. So it'll be good to see what wins the prize next year. And the other sort of theme that's kind of felt a little bit dominant to me this year is historical. It's like about, you know, empire and coming to terms with empire and talking about the realities of empire, and saying that we need a conversation about the wholeness of the story of empire, not just the flag waving hurrah stuff. So I listened to Satnam Sangira's Empireland on audio, and I watched the TV show on Channel 4 as well. And Alex Renton was on the TV show, and he did a book as well about his own family's history with slavery. And so and EUP did a book about has just released a book about slavery in the Highlands. And so I think we're probably going to see, and good as well, because I don't actually understand what the controversy is in wanting to know the whole picture of something, you know, like it seems daft to me that you should say those are not subjects that you can talk about. Why wouldn't you want to know more? I mean, well, that's how I view anything to do with history, is why wouldn't you want to see it from all different perspectives?
No, exactly.
So,
and that's beginning to happen a lot more, which is great.
Yeah. But it's sad to have seen, particularly Satnam Sangira in the TV show. He was saying how not all the reaction from his book has been great, and it just, I don't understand. I just don't understand.
that unfortunately, as we know, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But they are.
Yeah. But there's also in other non-fiction, there's been a lot of big autobiographies this year as well. Like, well, yeah, that's one of them.
Pat Nevin, the accidental footballer. Now, you don't get much, and Pat's a slight fellow, but you don't get much bigger than Pat Nevin. Anyway, yes, you were saying, so who would you
He's a slight fellow. But like Billy Connolly, like he's just taken over the world with his autobiography, which I'm going to download on audiobook and listen to it rather than read it. But Brian Cox and Alan Cumming and Bobby Gillespie, as you said earlier on.
Bobby's, so this again was White Rabbit book, and was a lot better than I thought it was going to be, I have to say. You would never think that this man here, Bobby Gillespie, who, as we know, is no stranger to hallucinogens, shall we say that, or whatever. Anyway, remember his memory of his early life in particular is astonishing. I mean,
I've only read the first bit, but I really want to read the whole thing because I read up to Punk, so I read like his childhood bit. I have to say, it's the best bit of the book. I do think his childhood, his school years, his early years in bands before joining the Jesus and Mary train. So the whole book's interesting, but that is the really fascinating, because it's an incredible picture of late 60s and 70s Glasgow, which a couple of other books do as well. But I just wanted to say, Pat Nevin's The Accidental Footballer is a memoir for people who maybe don't like football. It's really interesting. Them actually were born and grew up very kind of close to each other. They both sort of, they both have a sort of similar, both the childhood elements of it are really quite similar, and the fact that they grew up in a time where violence was normal. And you had to negotiate it.
Music references in here, like the time he meets Morrissey and all that kind of stuff. It's it's well worth a read. But those, I mean, there's lots of great memoirs. I probably will read the Billy Connolly one, even though I think I've got a feeling I might have heard most of the stories, over the years elsewhere.
Oh Yeah, I'm sure there will
I
be.
think will be very interesting. And
Sorry, I missed who you said there.
Brian Cox, the actor.
Oh right, yes,
Will be
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. He. It's interesting because, you know, particularly you think that folk are a little bit more savvy and a little bit more politic about what they say in books and things now. Brian Cox doesn't seem to give a shit about that.
And still, in my opinion, the best Hannibal Lecter. There you are. There's a controversial.
I don't think it's that controversial. I know other people that feel the same.
So let's move into crime, since we're talking about Hannibal Lecter. There's a terrible segue, but I always feel that we could probably do a separate podcast on crime fiction, Scottish crime fiction, because yet again, there's just been so much and so many brilliant books published this year. I've got a whole pile of them here that I'm going to talk about. But first, the latest Alan Parks, The April Dead. The year is not complete without the latest Alan Parks coming out. It's got to that stage. It's like the first cuckoo of spring, you know. Then the Alan Parks comes out, and they're just great. They're just.
Yeah. Though I think is I think this year's one's going to come out a little later because we're getting into late spring now. So. So it won't, because usually they come out in sort of January, February time, but I think, well, obviously the next one's going to be out in May.
So do you have any crime, before I go on to my big pile of books here, do you have any crime that you want to discuss?
Well, my favourite crime book this year, and again, it's more left field really, and I've mentioned it briefly already, but it's Denise Mina's Rizzio. Because it is a crime that happened. It's about a horrific murder.
Oh man, he doesn't stint, does she, on the kind of violence and claret, as they say.
Oh my god!
It's a fabulous, it's an utterly fabulous book. Now it's the first in a series of that Polygon are doing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's called Darklands. That's what it's called, and next year they're bringing out 2 with Jenny Fagan. Hex, which is about witches, and Alan Warner is doing one on the Jacobites, Bonnie Prince Charlie, I think. That one's coming out later on in the year. But yeah, Rizzio is great because it's a very short book for one. So like you can read it in an afternoon and love it in an afternoon, and because it just takes place over the weekend where Rizzio is murdered. And the thing is, because if you don't know the story of Rizzio, he was killed by a whole cabal of noblemen who wanted to get rid of him because at the time the Mary Queen of Scots was trying to get through in Parliament a law that would mean that a lot of these noblemen would lose a lot of their land and power, and so instead of, you know, killing the Queen, which like outright would bring out all its problems, they thought they would kill Rizzio in a horrific manner as possible to and the shock would be so bad it would make Mary Queen of Scots miscarry because she was heavily pregnant at the time, and then that would mean that Darnley could take his place on the throne. And because they didn't want a single person to be culpable for the crime, they all took their turns to stab him, and it's just horrific. But the great thing about this book that I really, really loved is that even though it was set in the 16th century, 16th century, it was written with a complete 21st century narrative voice. And it was and the judgment in it as well was really good. I don't normally like too judgmental a tone, but I really appreciated it in this book from Denise Mina. I thought it just added to the to the whole sort of wider theme of the piece, which is about power and how it's wielded, and you know, the notion that men with power are somehow noble just because they've got power themselves when they clearly aren't. And I just love the way that she just wags her finger and just kind of just sort of shows the bullshit of that.
It also shows you what can be done in a novella, because as you say, it's a short book, but wow, it packs a punch. I mean, it really kind of slaps around the dish, as we used to say. And you know, the scene, I mean, what a bounder, that's, I'm putting it lightly, Darnley, you know, there's scenes where he's kind of trying to grab the kid inside Mary, and she, it's on the other, it's okay, it's on the other side. I mean, and also again, another Edinburgh novel.
Oh, that's true, of course, yeah.
There's a scene where, I won't give it away, but where someone goes through, I think it's the grass market to do ill, which is astonishing.
Oh God, yeah, that scene was horrendous.
Yeah. It's another example of how getting the place right really adds power to the story being told, which is something that a few of the books have mentioned.
Yeah. So I really can't wait to see what Jenny and Alan do with their books as well. I mean, they've got quite a first one to live up to.
Absolutely. I'm going to just go through a few of my favourite crime books of the year, because I did read quite a lot of them. One, the latest from Charles E. McGarry. I love books, and Charles was on the podcast as well, if you want to hear him talking more about it. But I just love the Liam Moran books. Again, that whole thing about someone writing just for you, the whole thing about the way he dresses, he eats, and the cars, and I adore it. Another fellow that we both know, Douglas Skelton, A Rattle of Bones. Yeah,
that series is going from strength to strength. It's really good to see.
And it's real kind of Highland noir, isn't it? It's set up in and around Inverness, and it's the Rebecca Connolly, the main character in it. And yeah, they're absolutely rattling along. And I think the next one is announced as well. I think there's a
I think they announced it maybe a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember my short-term memory is really, really bad at the moment, so I can't even remember the name of it.
Talking of Highland noir, Alan Gillespie published The Mash House, which is an incredible piece of Highland noir set up in an, again, kind of Fort William way, and he really captures that place where the modern where the modern world kind of meets the old Scotland, the Highlands of Scotland. You know, it very much does that. Someone else who people might know as Tom Gillespie, but T.J. Reid. And he's hurling them out. It's the DCI Bone.
Yeah, is he not like already on his third one?
The third one's due early next year. This is just the first one. Dark is the Grave, but a really fast, interesting crime thriller. If you like your crime fiction, then Dark is the Grave by T.J. Reid is one to go for. And there was the latest Doug Johnson as well.
Yeah. And also, like, again, harken back to the historical. One of the ones that I read this year was Debut, and it won the debut McIlvanney Bloody Scotland, which was Robbie Morrison's Edge of the Grave, which has been touted as Peaky Blinders set in Glasgow, and that's a pretty good summary. Actually, it's Glasgow set in the 30s. So and again, it really rams home about the inheritance of violence that came home with the men that went and fought in the First World War, and the repercussions are still felt by the society that they live in the 1930s, just before we're ramping up to another world war. And that's a really good book, and a really good like, again, it's like, why hasn't anybody done this before? 1930s Glasgow, that sounds brilliant. It's just when somebody hits upon like a simple idea and really runs with it. And so I'm really excited to see how that series pans out too. I think there'll be a new one. Well, maybe not next year, I don't know. But yeah, I'm really interested to see where that series goes.
It's interesting that crime series, people seem to commit to them quite early on.
Yeah.
Say, well, we don't just want the first book and see how it does. They'll say, yeah, we're going to give you 3 books down the line. And that seems to happen quite a bit. Like, for instance, Doug Johnson's Skelf books, I think it was always going to be more than one book, you know.
Yeah, I thought it was just going to be a trilogy, so I'm really pleased that a 4th one's in the making.
Great books, fantastic. And finally, I just wanted to talk about, because we're going to talk about big hitters returning, and there are
right, okay.
bigger than William McIlvany himself. But
yes, he was down. He was down as or they, because there was both of them were down as my big guns coming to us. Yeah, I've not actually read the book yet. But, it's terrible because my lockdown brain has meant that I've not read as much as I normally do. So I'm mightily impressed with how many books that you've managed to read this year.
My lockdown brain meant I had to escape into reading lots of books. But it's a Laidlaw book, just to give you a bit of background on it. William McIlvany's widow contacted Ian Rankin to say, we've got this manuscript, would you like to go and finish it? And it's just great. It's great to read Laidlaw again. It's Glasgow in the 70s. It is 70s, yeah. And it absolutely captures it beautifully. It's actually a really good kind of partner to Alan Park's books.
Yeah.
Similar way. But The Dark Remains, and yes, the return of not 1 but 2 Scotlit heavyweights.
Yeah, I know. And I remember on the Damien Barr show that Ian Rankin actually said that he had asked Alan Parks a lot of Glasgow 70s questions because he knew of Alan Parks writing his series.
That's interesting.
See, the collegiate loveliness of Scottish books.
Comes again, absolutely. So we're going to talk about the return of some big Scotlit hitters, as you say, because this year did see some great books by people that some of whom we hadn't seen for a while, including, I'm going to start with Lazy Susan and the return of Alan Bissett. A novella written in a really interesting way. It's like one of those Dungeons and Dragon books. You could choose the way that the story unfolded, which was really interesting. But just great to have Alan back as a writer again, and you know, making us laugh and wince and all the things that he does very well.
Yeah, he manages the way he can make you laugh and say something really quite devastating.
Yeah.
Like not long afterwards is a it's a skill.
Skill. And we also had him on the podcast as well. It was great to catch up with him and have a chat. So
I know, I hope this means we're going to get more prose, because I mean, yeah, we would like more prose, Alan.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're listening to this, I hope you are. Yes, we could do some more prose. I'm talking about more prose, none more so than David Keenan's Monument Maker. I mean, what
monster
that is. Where to start? We could probably have done a podcast all on its own about Monument Maker. But,
I think this is the running theme of this podcast.
Yes, we need to do more podcasts. That's exactly right. But I mean, as people can see who are watching the video version, if you're listening, it's a huge book. It's 800 odd words, I think, and just fantastic.
800 pages, you mean?
800 pages, yes.
A squillion million words.
800 pages, and every one just takes you. He does that David Keenan thing of surprising you and taking you literally taking you places you wouldn't expect. Just one of the publications of the year.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's almost a sort of, it's like a strange, weird psychic experience reading a David Keenan book. Like it really infects your consciousness in a way that other books don't, and that's not a denigration on the other books. It's just that's the way he writes.
He gets inside the head like few writers.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know how he does it. Like it is like, because I do have quite vivid dreams, and I've got a whole world like in my dreams, like I have it repeats, like, and when I'm dreaming I know where the streets are and all that kind of stuff. And I always wake up and I'm always like, I wish that I could just transmit that directly onto a bit of paper or whatever. I think he knows how to do that.
He managed to get down on paper, not even things that he's thinking, you know, things that are just hanging about in the back there. It's reading a David Keenan book. We've talked about him before in previous podcasts. It's kind of like nothing else, you know. I don't know many writers that kind of make such an impression. You're right, it sticks with you. I mean, it still sticks with. There's scenes in this that still stick with me and probably won't ever, you know, disappear, but in a very, very good way. I'm stunned to see what he does next after Monument Maker. I know, because you kind of feel like surely he got down everything that's in his head with this book, but no, I'm not sure I could live with having all those voices in my head. From a publishing point of view, it's interesting because, you know, this came out on White Rabbit, as we said. Not many publishers would put out a book this size, would they? Yeah. That's the answer. So, you know, kudos to White Rabbit for doing that and supporting David and all the other writers that we've kind of spoken about, including 434, the Alan Warner novel, which I thought was a real. I found reading both when I was reading Monument Maker, I kept going back to when I read Kitchenly 434 as well. There was something about those two books that were talking to each other. I don't know if I can fully explain that, but I felt like I was in a similar space when I was reading them. Just I loved Kitchenly 434 as well. It was one of those books. I guess it's the same space because both of them are like, they both tackle like humanity, if you want to be grand about it, but in very different ways. You know, like David Keenan takes you here, there, and everywhere, like across the world, across time, across space, across universes. and Alan Warner takes you to this very like one space, this country house in the south of England. It's Cotswolds, it's something like that, isn't it? It's like the fancy rock star place, Henley, something like that. Where all the rock star place, isn't it? Yeah. But they felt very similar to me in that they were asking big humanity questions in a way that you weren't. It wasn't clear that they were asking big humanity questions, if you know what I mean, or just portraying humanity in such a highfalutin and just really lowbrow way at the same time, and just sort of the clash between the ideal that we all want to be and the reality of who we really are, and that makes your heart go out to them, because they just both of them blended that comic tragedy thing very much so well. I don't think I'll ever think of. Sorry. What was that? I was going to say in Kitchenly 434 in particular, the kind of comedy and tragedy are never too far away from each other. You know, absolutely, you really feel for the central character, and then other times you think, oh my goodness, you know, it's you know. But like, I don't think I'll ever think of A Slotted Spoon in the same way again. I think of all the literary images that have stayed in my head from this year, him running about with that slotted spoon. Yeah, that is a good one. Although there's plenty of images in Monument Maker that I've similarly. So you just have to read. If you've not read the book, you have to read it now just to know what I'm talking about. Absolutely right. So what other heavyweights were you thinking of who you wanted to mention? Well, we've mentioned Rankin and Mcclory, we've mentioned Jackie Kaye, we've mentioned James Robertson, and we've briefly mentioned Andrew Gregg as well, who actually is kind of a heavyweight, but he's like a quiet heavyweight. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, I don't think as much fuss has been made about Rose Nicholson as there should have been.
I think Andrew's one of the best writers there is, but I do think that it's the quiet man of Scottish writing. But
Yeah, he really is.
it's,
And it's I've never read a Dud's book by him. Like when you as soon as you start reading it, it's like that feeling of, oh, I'm home, or I'm just, oh, nothing to fear here. I'm getting taken away by a master storyteller and somebody that knows how to use language really well as well. Not in a like really fancy flowery way, but in a really direct way that makes you think but makes you feel at the same time. I just think I don't understand why he's not. I think he should. I think he is a heavyweight, but
yeah,
I think, yeah, but I like, as I say, I don't think enough people paid as much attention to Rose Nicholson as they should have. I hope the readers have. Maybe it was just I didn't see it getting spoken about as much in the press or whatever. But yeah, I'm really enjoying Rose Nicholson. That's the book that I'm reading at the moment, and I very similarly to Monument Maker, it's making me think about the clash between the abstract and the theoretical and the ideas and the world of ideas and the world of creation against lived experience, and the clash of those worlds, when on occasion, and it does happen, when the abstract and the theoretical can sometimes get taken a little bit too much more seriously than lived experience does.
Right.
Like, is art really worth it if you have to hurt somebody to make it? Is our ideas so grand if somebody is in pain, or you put restrictions on somebody's living in order for them to be true? Both of those books definitely wrestle with those ideas. And Rose Nicholson is a brilliant character, and I'm already brokenhearted for her because I know it's not going to end well.
Right, there are some writers who you turn to for comfort, and I think Andrew Gregg is one of those. And I have to say, I think James Robertson is as well. And News of the Dead, which we have mentioned before, is another fantastic book. Historical.
Yeah, that's on my pile. See, like sort of June to September was my peak reading period, whereas the early of the years, and now we're come to the later half of the year, I'm just a bit exhausted. But so I hope to get my reading mojo back in the Christmas holidays when I can rest a little bit. Yeah, so I've not read News from the Dead yet, but that's on my pile.
I think you will love it. Some other I'm going to call them literary heavyweights that get released or published this year. You've already mentioned Denise Mina and Rizzio, so we don't really need to talk about that except to say how great it is. But the return of Graham McCrae Burnett and Case Study.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
One of the best books of the year, absolutely, and it was great.
Totally.
Going back, and it was something that you could tell it was written by the same person that did His Bloody Project, but it was very, very different as well.
Yeah.
Little, he puts himself in the book again. He keeps saying he's not playing with readers, but I won't let him away with that. Do you know? Because
I remember watching your podcast when you were interviewing him, and you brought up the blank page.
Yeah.
And I know that other reviewers and stuff have brought up the blank page. And Graham was trying to say, no, it's not a formal thing about talking about, you know, drawing attention to fiction or the fictional format or whatever. I think that blank page is as much about giving away her character more than about a comment on the form of fiction.
Yeah.
Because she's a character that withholds and deceives, and I think that blank page is a version of that. So I think that's part of her character portrayal, that blank page.
I think
That's what I've decided.
if you were talking to Graham, he would just say, that's absolutely fine. Once it's written, you to do it. That's what he would say, and then rightly so. You know, death of the author and all that stuff that he's kind of so into. But yeah, it's a wonderful book set in the world of psychotherapy. But yeah, so much more. The characters are astonishing, as you mentioned there.
Yeah.
Amazing creation. And he always manages to create these incredible characters.
Yeah, and it's like I still consider him a new author for some reason, which is weird because you know that this is his 4th book.
Yeah.
Just that as soon as I started it, and I have to say I felt the same with his bloody project, even though that was just the 2nd book at the time. But the confidence in the way he writes astounds me. Like, because you know when you read a writer who's building up their career, sometimes you can see in their 1st and 2nd books them finding their way.
Yeah.
Whereas with Graham McCrae Burnett, his authority of narrative voice and everything it's right there already, and I'm really impressed by that. Again, it was like, you know, when I was reading the Andrew Gregg book, and I just sort of sat back and was like, I don't have to worry here. I don't have to, you know, because sometimes you do get that feeling of self-consciousness from writing. Don't get that at all in Graham's work, and it's just I really enjoyed reading it. That's definitely up there in my top 3 of the books of the year.
No, absolutely. And very briefly, we might not consider them heavyweights. Maybe they are to be heavyweights. I think they're just 3 of the finest writers around. Helen Mcclory's Bitter Hall, which actually was only her 2nd novel, is that right?
2nd novel, yeah. The rest are short story collections and the Goldblum.
But wonderful novel. Again, set in Edinburgh. Again, I think we'll talk about Luckenbooth in a moment, but there's a supernatural aspect to it. It kind of reimagines Edinburgh in a kind of new way as well. Donald Murray.
That's actually next on my pile after Andrew Gregg, because as I say, like March to May in particular, I didn't do much reading at all. So anything that was released in March to May, I'm still getting round to.
See, Vic, I'm not expecting you to have read all the books that we talk about. I hope you weren't under.
But I'm expecting me to read all these books.
Donald S. Murray in A Veil of Mist. Great to have another book from Donald. Should say as well that this and Case Study are published by Saraband, who an astonishing year, publishing some great stuff, including Ewan Morrison's How to Survive Everything.
Yes. Saraband have had a brilliant year. Yeah,
absolutely. And this was a kind of I think this is probably the best pandemic novel I've read. Classic Ewan, you know, takes things to extreme at times, but really it's about family. Again, about family, one of the big themes of the year. But yeah, it's a great novel, and it's one I think which has kind of been overlooked when people are talking about best books of the year. But Ewan Morrison, Survive Everything, is very good.
It did get shortlisted for the Mcclory though,
right?
Or longlisted. Did it get shortlisted? I can't remember.
Oh,
no, it got longlisted. Yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't have thought that would have fitted in with the Mcclory, but there you go.
Well, the Mcclory is like, they don't go for the usual police procedurals when they. It's normally crime with a twist that usually wins the Mcclory.
That's crime. That's a twist that I never really thought of it as crime, but there you go.
Well, kidnap, is there not a kidnap? Well, he kidnaps
his
kids,
does he not? Crimes are committed. There are definitely crimes are committed. I thought we could briefly look at the fiction books of the year in the Saltire Awards, because it was such an interesting. So the Saltire, people who don't know, are the Scottish kind of book awards, aren't they? The big, among the big Scottish awards, and they had just happened recently. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, is that right?
Yeah, I think it was.
The fiction books of the year, I thought, was an incredibly strong lineup. You had Scabby Queen, Kirsten Innes, which we spoke about last year, Douglas Stewart's Huggy Bane, which we spoke about a minute ago, David Ross's There's Only One Danny Garvey, and I was so pleased that David's book was in there, because I think it's his best novel yet. I said this to him. He seems to get better and better with every book.
That's good. That's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah. And set in the world of junior Ayrshire football. But I definitely deserve to be among the award.
Oh, absolutely. But that shortlist, that's the thing with that shortlist, is that so many other books could have been on it, and yet at the same time there wasn't a book on it that didn't deserve to be on it, if you know what I mean.
We should say that the winner was Eli Percy's Duck Feet, which was spoken about, which was also the Scottish Book of the Year overall, which is astonishing and fantastic.
Yeah.
You're watching this, Eli. Well done. I mean, that's incredible. And then there was also Jenny Fagan's Luckenbooth.
Yeah. You've got that. See.
Well, I've got both. I have to say, I very rarely read a book twice. I've read this 3 times in the last year. I've read the hard book.
Oh, really?
Paperback. I absolutely love it. We were said that we're going to talk about our books of the year. That's my Scottish Book of the Year, Jenny Fagan's Luckenbooth, because it does, you'll say it's obviously an Edinburgh novel. I think already it's a great Edinburgh novel, and it really reimagines the city as this supernatural, magic, a dark, twisted place. And I love the fact that you can follow a lot of the places she takes you. You can go from the water at Leith and go up and over the bridges and up the high street and to Luckenbooth. And then you've got this whole thing of the building itself being a character in its own right, and how the stories are told not just over the 10 stories or the 9 stories, but over the 10 years, starting in 1910s, that kind of thing, and going through. And each story grabs you in its own right, but they're all twisted into each other. It's a phenomenal book. I absolutely love it, and I'd probably read it again, because it gives you something each time.
And funnily enough, you know how the Luckenbooth was also another book that I kept harking back to when I was reading Monument Maker as well. That's what a lot of Monument Maker did do. That it just sort of pinged me off into other fictional worlds, and Luckenbooth was one of them as well. I really love Luckenbooth. It's probably my favourite book of the year, because it breaks so many rules, and it does it fearlessly and unselfconsciously. I think this is one of the things that I really love about Jenny Fagan and David Keenan's writing, is that there's it's a fearlessness in their writing. It's totally unselfconscious, which I really, really like, which brings an energy that you don't get a lot in fiction, because sometimes you can read. I mean, I don't doubt that both David and Jenny crafted this book like in rewrites and all that kind of stuff. Maybe not David. He said he doesn't believe in rewrites.
That's why one of them's 800 pages long and the other one isn't. But yeah, I know what you mean. But I think what you're saying is the fearlessness is a great way of putting it. Absolutely is. And in that way, Jenny has created a book for the ages. I mean, it's a book I can see being looked at and studied and discussed, as long as people like me and you are doing this kind of thing.
Because, I mean, as I said at the beginning, it's a historical novel, but it doesn't, because I read this at the start of the year before I'd noticed all these other historical novels. So this was kind of like the first one that I read this year. And I was just like, this book is a historical novel and it's doing nothing like what you expect from a historical novel. And I love it. I don't give a shit if there's anachronisms or it's maybe some of the research might be wrong or whatever. That's not the point. That the point isn't exactitude. The point isn't
it's a novel.
Yeah. It's the difference between authenticity and verisimilitude.
Yeah.
Like I think sometimes authenticity is fetishized a little bit too much for verisimilitude, which I think is more important in fiction. I understand. I mean, that's not to say I don't like authenticity. I'm not saying that at all. But it's not the ingredient that's paramount in the same way as the act of making things seem as they are. And she does that so well in this book. And it's about the feeling that she generates and like all the exclamation marks even. I love it. Like just like it's just full of energy. And yeah, I just love that kind of writing where she's just like, you know, that breaks the rules. Yeah. And I like
absolutely. It. Vibrant. I mean, it absolutely sings off the page. And you know, if you read it and go away and think, well, did Hugh McDermott actually attend a party? And then something's wrong here. And you know, if just it's one of these books that just let it take over you. I suppose what you were saying, Monument Maker as well. Let it take over you and let it take you where it wants. Because at times that might be frightening, at times that might be odd, but wow, what a journey it is. And it is literally a journey. And I just love the way it reimagines Edinburgh. I think it does. It's, yeah, as I say, it's not just, it's a great Scottish book, but it's particularly a great Edinburgh book, which is...
and it's funny because, you know, the journey that the Devil's Daughter makes from Leith up until to the Royal Mile... in a weird way, not a lot has changed in Edinburgh. You know, those Leith tenements have been up there already. You know, the high street's not changed. No. The only bit that has changed is the sort of St James's Centre, Leith Street bit. But like the rest, that's the thing when you write about contemporary Edinburgh, is that because the historical Edinburgh is so present, even in contemporary Edinburgh, that I just find that amazing.
It is. It's a city where the past almost dominates the whole thing. I'm not going to find it to read it, but there is in the kind of final sections in the level 9, if you like, in the coming up to the millennium. There's a kind of description of Edinburgh that's utterly fantastic. You know, it's just great the way it describes it and all its kind of glory and darkness and all of those things.
Yeah, I like books that don't just portray Edinburgh as either too seedy for like, you know, and like just Morningside shyness. Like Edinburgh begins and ends at Morningside. I mean, honestly.
That sounds almost like a personal thing. That
it is. I feel no shame in ranting away.
All the books that we've spoken about, that both of us, our favourite book of the year is the same one, by Jenny Fagan. Fantastic. So we're coming to the end. I think we've managed to keep it under 2 hours this year, Vikki, which is not bad going for us. Before we talk about what's coming in 2022, I've got this written down as any other business. Is there anything that you want to discuss that we haven't discussed that you feel should be talked about?
Oh, one last thing about heavy hitters is Ali Smith, and the completion of the what do you call a trilogy that's 4?
Quadrilogy.
There you go.
Yes, we should mention summer, but well, I mean, Ali's got a book coming out next year as well.
Yes. Is it in this, because it looks the same. I've seen the cover. It follows the same cover design.
I don't know if it's a companion piece to. It's called Companion.
I know.
I guess it's probably. I'm guessing. I've no idea. It may be a companion piece to the Seasons books, which is usually summer finished this year, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was completed this year, and I completed them this year as well. And it's so weird that because so much else happened this year within Scottish books, is that a big thing like the finishing of Ali Smith's massive project kind of flew a little under the radar a little bit, just because there's just so many other things going on.
No, absolutely.
But both spring and summer, I mean, out of all the quadrology, of all of them, I
I'm not
think
sure that's
spring
right,
was my
I think it is, but quadrology.
quadriloopy.
Out of
I don't
all
know.
four.
Yeah. I think spring was my favourite one, but I think it ended really well on summer as well. I just think there's nobody out there that has as much fictional empathy with characters as she does.
Yeah.
Even characters that you think that writers might be guilty of being judgmental about, like your middlebrow folk. She, like, because there's a mum character in the summer book that could under other writers, they could easily have made her a real, like, a sort of cardboard cutout, easy to point and laugh at character, and Ali Smith doesn't do that, and I absolutely love her for that, because when she first comes in, I was kind of like, oh, but I should have trusted Ali Smith. Of course, she wouldn't make a caricature.
No, absolutely right. And it's worth saying, actually, because that was something I'd forgotten about, finished this year.
Well, if you've not read the 4 books, then do it.
Yeah, absolutely. For those who don't know, it's our 4 seasons quadrilogy. There you go.
Quadrilogy. That's what we're going to go with.
So yeah, any other business?
That's it. I think I'm 2021 out.
Excellent. Well, I just want to make a mention for some of the stuff that's happening on social media and Instagram in particular, because for Scottish books, there's an incredible kind of community on Instagram that is celebrating and sharing and all the things we talked about earlier, Scottish books, particularly Scotland Daily, which is a fantastic Instagram place to find out so much about Scottish books. As it suggests, they post something daily about various books, about things that are coming up. They've just done their kind of awards of the year. But there's also things like Bookshelves of Glasgow, which took a picture of my lovely bookshelves. But there's lots of celebrations of books. I'm trying to think of other people, Scotties in books, and there's loads more. If you look for hashtag Scottish books on Instagram, you'll find loads of people, and it's such a lovely celebration of Scottish writing.
I know, I must admit, like, even I look at Scotland Daily to see if there's anything that I've missed. Because I don't like it when I miss things.
That's the place to go then, folk. And you want to hear what we talk about next year first, go to Scotland Daily.
Yeah.
So let's talk about then what is coming up in 2022 briefly before we have to say cheerio. Do you have some things that you're really looking forward to?
Well, I mean, the thing is, 2022 is going to be the year of Scotland stories. You know, that's the theme. That, you know how Visit Scotland does themed years. Yeah. 2022 is the year of Scotland stories. So if there's a year where celebrating Scottish words and creativity is paramount, then this is the year to do it. And I've already, I mean, behind me, I'm not going to turn my computer around because then you'll see how messy my living room is. But I've already got a pile of 2022 books. It's getting quite hefty already. So there's Louise Welsh, The Return of Rilke.
Cannot wait for that. And that's one of the ones I was going to talk about. The Second Cut is what it's called, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, that's happening soon. That's definitely going to be my Christmas holiday reading. I mean, Ali Smith that you've just talked about. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to Hear No Evil, which is the debut novel by Sarah Smith, it's Glasgow, it's historical Glasgow novel.
Is it John Smith?
No. Well, I'll lend you. I could get it.
When you say new author, and the way that you said that, I thought it was Sarah Smith that we all should know. That was why.
Oh, right. I mean, I know her. I follow her on Twitter, and we chat sometimes at like book events and things. What else am I looking forward to? As I say, I'm looking forward to Hex and Jenny Fagan's one, and I'm looking forward to Alan Warner's one. I can't remember what the title is for that one. I'm looking forward to a book called I Am Not Your Eve by oh god, see, I need my eyes tested. I can't read my writing anymore. Vikki Ponambalam, right. And she's an Edinburgh author, and it's published by Blue Moose, which is a brilliant indie publisher based down south. And it's a book about Paul Gauguin's wife. Right. So and it's told from her perspective. So that's going to be quite a good read. The Voids by Ryan O'Connor is another debut that I'm looking forward to. There's going to be a new Miss Blaine's Prefect mystery coming out, and it's called, I think it's called Miss Blaine's Prefect and the Three Weird Sisters, or the Weird Three Sisters, can't remember, but it's set in Macbeth times.
Well,
so I'm looking forward to that.
Amy Liptrott's got a new book coming out.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Very much looking forward to it. I think you've maybe mentioned most of the ones I was going to mention. Oh, Karen Campbell's got a new one coming out called Paper Cup.
Oh, yes. Paper Cup. Yeah.
Really looking forward to that. Love Karen's writing. And also, now, did we mention this, or was this before we started recording? Michael Pedersen's book.
Oh, yeah, no, it was before we started recording. Boyfriends, yeah. His latest collection.
Robertson from Fighting Rabbit. I cannot wait to read.
Yeah, I was at Noiriki last night, and he did a couple of poems from it. And if they're anything to go by, woof, it's going to be good.
Well, Vikki, I think we've managed to reach the end of our chat, but thanks again for taking the time to do it. It's always a pleasure.
It is, with my trusty Prosecco by my side.
It's got us through to the end. And we'll be back soon with, I think, the best films of 2021. So we'll see you then.